Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we have a very exciting review of the brand new Broadway Limited Paragon 4 Santa Fe 4000 Class 282. So let's get started. Alright, I'm very excited for this review because these things are long awaited. They were announced in around late 2019, I believe, and they were meant to arrive in late 2020. However, due to the virus that we're all well too familiar with, they were delayed, obviously, and they ended up arriving in, I believe, June of 2021. And I've been looking around for a good deal for a long time, and after finding a good one, which I'll mention later, here it is. I finally got one, and these are I'm really excited because before Broadway Limited made these, only Brass made them. In fact, only 3 brass manufacturers. PFM imported one, Sunset imported one, or made one, and Key imported one by Sam Hangsa. And the Key ones are really expensive. The Sunset ones are actually very inaccurate, or not very inaccurate, but fairly inaccurate and fairly difficult to fix. And the PFM ones are very uncommon and also not very detailed. And so with this very welcomed arrival, we finally get, as fellow Santa Fe modelers, we're very welcomed for this arrival. First, let's talk about some of the history. In 1917, Santa Fe sought for more powerful Mikados after the rather underwhelming 1300 and 1329 class Mikados. That is how the 1360 class Mikado was created. It had bigger 63-inch drivers and larger cylinders than its predecessors, thereby not only increasing its top speed, but also its tractive effort to a rather impressive 63,000 pounds per kilogram. 128 of these were made, and soon Santa Fe ordered a second batch of 101 near-identical Mikados, numbered 4,000 through 4,100, in 1921. If we were to combine these two classes of engines together, it would be the single largest class of Santa Fe steam locomotive ever produced, with a staggering 229 samples built. Soon, Santa Fe demanded even greater power, and various engines like the 4101 class Berkshires and the massively successful 3800 class 210-2s were built, pushing the Mikados gradually off heavy-duty freight duties and into lighter branch line and switching duties. Many last till the last days of steam. All 1360 and 4000 class Mikados were scrapped by 1956, and tragically none were preserved. Alright, let's get started with the review, and then first off I want to talk about the box. I'm actually going to move the engine aside here. And so the box is actually a rather good design. As you can see, it is a very long box, and what that means is, let me take the other half here. It means that the engine and tender are actually packed coupled together, which is really good, especially for some modelers who don't have space to have their engines laid out, and who have to put the engine back into its box and take it back out again every single time you want to operate it, which obviously gets annoying fast, and also it means it wears down the plug faster. So this is a really good design. This ice cube packaging actually is very sophisticated. It actually has side panels which really protect the engine well, and there's a few thin blocks of foam, which does the job. One thing I would like to complain about though is that, oh, by the way, it comes with the smoke funnel, but no smoke fluid, which is rather interesting. One thing I would like to complain about is this. So, the problem with this is, in BLI and Paragon 2, and maybe even Paragon, they would come with a spare driver without traction tires. So by default, and from the factory, they would include traction tires on the driver, but then they would include a separate wheel without traction tires in case you don't want to use traction tires on your engines, and they would include a spare pair of traction tires. Paragon 3 though, and afterwards, they removed that feature, which I think is very frustrating because as someone who doesn't like traction tires, I think they're a pain. I think engines should be weighted enough for them to pull a decent load without traction tires, and also it means they really can't double head engines, especially unless if they're perfectly speed matched. And I just don't like them. So the fact that they don't give you the option for it and just give you a pair of spare traction tires is really no good. That is something that I believe it's a cost-saving measure, but honestly I think it's kind of shows how cheap Broadway Limited is in that sense, and that is one complaint. But otherwise, the box is very nice. It is a really thick cardboard. It definitely will protect the engine well, and it's nice and compact, so you can store a lot of these boxes without taking up too much space. Alright, let's start with detail, and just, I'm going to do it a little bit differently here. I'm going to actually have my Broadway Limited 210-2 Santa Fe engine here on the side here. This is a Paragon 2 model, and we're just going to have this on the side just so you can see some comparisons. I'll make a few comparisons, but for the most part I'll be focusing on the 4000 class because obviously it is a review for this engine here. And yeah, so we'll begin on the front and we'll work our way to the rear. In the front here there's a really nice painted tarpon gray smoke box with the classic Santa Fe headlight. It is a bit oversized, just like the Paragon 2 version. In fact, I think most BLI headlights are all a bit oversized to accommodate that LED, that big, 3mm LED. But the printing on the front is really crisp. The 4023 is really well done. And then on the bottom here, you'll see this is a switcher pilot. What this means is, it's a pilot that has footboards, so the switchers can stand on it, and it's designed to, either work in the yard or work on a branch line and switch, local industries or whatever. But it can also go on the main road, on the main line. On the left here, you'll see this is actually the mainline pilot, the road pilot, as BLI calls it. They offered both of these models in both switcher and road pilot versions. I ended up getting the switcher pilot for the Mikado, because I like my Mikados to be versatile. But both options are available. And yeah, so anyways, there's also a non-operating coupling lever. Sorry, excuse me there. It does not seem to move. There's a nice KD coupler in the front here. It actually sticks out a lot from the front here, which is kind of weird. One thing I did notice is that the coupler box, there's no detail on the coupler box, as you can see here. Whereas the Road Pilot one actually has a bit of detail. It has the housing, I guess you could say, on the coupler box itself, whereas the newer version doesn't seem to have that. There you go, you can see it's just a bare, you can actually see the KD spring back there, which is rather strange. It's a weird downside, but it's not a big deal. Otherwise though, the front is very similar. You can see the Let's Go feed water heater in the front here, mounted in the, below the smoke box, and the ladders, and everything is just really well done. Let's move on to the side. Alright, on the side we have a really nice marker light. Does not operate, just like the Paragon 2 version. It has the builder's plate, which is actually really well done. I'll have a close-up of that photo, hopefully. Here's the pipe that goes to the Let's Go feed water heater into the boiler itself. Here's the pistons, which is really well rendered. Details really well rendered. There's a little thing there, I don't know what it's really called, but anyways. Besides that though, all the piping is separately applied. This is the pipe that goes from the Let's Go feed water heater to the pump. And yeah, just everything is really well done. Really crisp paint, everything looks really good. Moving our way down, we see the sanding pipes, which again is very well rendered. It is all separately applied, although everything here is plastic except for the handrail. I believe the handrail is metal. Everything else though, I do believe is plastic, which is a bit cheap, but also acceptable. I mean, why not? There is some mold-on detail, especially like this pipe right here, which I believe goes to the headlight. I think it's the electrical cable, as well as there's a cable that goes to the number boards, which do not operate. I don't know if you can see that right there. There's a little wire, molded on wire there. But everything else is really well rendered. There's some nice steps that are molded on, so you could get your way up there. And yeah, there's a nice little grab iron on the second sand dome here. Interestingly, so the Mikados as built only had one sand dome, and then throughout the years they actually added the second one. I'm not really 100% sure why, but they did that. So you can tell this is a late version of the Mikado. I would estimate around 1942 to 1958 when they're retired. This Mikado is meant to represent that. Toward the rear here, we have a whole lot of really lovely detail, including the air pump, obviously, and here's the feed water heater pump. We also have just a whole bunch of cables coming down. Here's the generator, which is really well molded. I don't know what this is. I wish I could tell you, but I don't. Here's the turret here. This is amazing. I love this detail. Hopefully I'll remember to get a close-up photo of it, but it is so well rendered. I do not know how they managed to do it. It is stunning. Whole lot of detail, a whole lot of piping underneath near the firebox area here. Yeah, nothing too standing out. Everything is all plastic, if to my belief. Yeah, everything is plastic. It's all nice and flexible. Like this pipe here, which might be a little, fragile because you might touch it or break it or whatever, but it's somewhat flexible, so it's not very brittle, so it shouldn't break off with some light touch, Moving toward the cab here, we have a cab figure, as you can see, which is a nice feature that was added to Paragon 3 and afterward logos, as well as this really nice sunshade. This sunshade's actually, I believe, die-cast or sheet metal, I believe. It might be, actually no, it's plastic, my bad. But it is painted white, which is nice. I can't show you back there, but the Paragon 2 version has a simple black sunshade, which is technically wrong. But yeah. Let's take a look also at the wheels here and the drive rods. So the drive rods and wheels are all blackened. The wheels are all painted black, including the tires. However, the axles are bare, which is, some people definitely don't like that. But I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think it's that hard to just paint those over, which I will do eventually, but right now I can't be bothered, honestly. One thing to note is that Broadway Limited made 2 different versions of the wheel sets on the Patrikios. You have the option to have a skull and disc driver on the 3rd wheel. This model does not have it because the place where I bought it did not have any of those engines with that specific modification. However, you can see on the 210-2 here, you can see that this one does actually have a skull and disc driver on the center wheel. So you would just imagine that wheel on this engine, and you get the idea. Santa Fe did give that modification to certain 282s, and I do believe that Broadway Limited did faithfully recreate that. I don't believe 4023 here had one of those modifications, but it's not a big deal. And yeah, I think overall the drive rods and everything look amazing. Alright, taking a look at the cabs here, both have the separately applied handrails and the deck plate, which has texture on it. They're all plastic though. The handrails are better metal, but the deck plates are plastic. And actually, I lied. The Paragon 2, at least this particular Paragon 2 model actually does have figures. I do know for a fact that some other Paragon 2 models did not come with figures, so it is definitely situational. Anyways, if I shine a light here, this is just my phone's flashlight, you can see that the interior of both cabs is just plain black molded one-piece cabs. You know, nothing too special. Even the throttle is molded on. There's some nice windows. Obviously, those are pretty nice on the sides here. But otherwise, nothing special about the cab, but again, you don't really see it that much anyways. And also, one thing to note, there's actually a little tiny cab LED inside the roof, which does light up, so it's pretty cool. Underneath the deck plate, there is an 8-pin plug, similar to the Paragon 2 models, and there's a little drawbar with 2 holes for varying tender to cab distances. Up on top, you can see some really nice machined brass safety valves, as well as a really nice whistle and a real brass bell, which is really cool in the front here, which does swing. This is identical to the Paragon 2, which has very similar details. Another thing I want to mention is that the Paragon 4 version actually still has a boiler steam area thing here, which is, well, obviously wrong. Shouldn't be there. In fact, you can actually see it also here too, and further down the line. The Paragon 2 version actually does this a little bit better. I'm going to just tilt the camera here. It still has a boiler steam in the front area here. It's very, very subtle though, as you can see. I think it looks better in the Paragon 2 version. And also toward the rear here, there's actually boiler bands right here, which is really cool. The Paragon 4 version does not have it, which is rather strange. So let's take a quick look at the chimney here, or the smokestack. This is another area that Santa Fe generally painted tarpon gray, and that's because it gets really hot there, just like the smoke box front. However, a lot of modelers actually don't paint them gray because, well, first off, it's a pain, because you can mask it off and everything like that. But second off, you know, in a lot of photos, these get really dirty, and as a result, they end up looking very black. I do believe this is a die-cast piece. It should be, because it gets really hot, because there is a smoke unit inside this engine. One thing to note though, mine does have a defect. You can see there's a little dot there. It's not really noticeable actually from any sort of distance, but it actually looks very obvious on camera. I can see that it's very noticeable on camera, which is a bit unfortunate. It looks like some paint maybe, or some dust got inside the paint. But it's not a big deal, I guess. It sort of is actually, because it's really expensive, but just something to note. On the engineer side, there's more of this very similar great detail, all very well made. There's actually a bit more molded on detail on this side. As you can see here, the generator, the pipes that come out of the generator is all molded on, which is kind of a shame actually, as well as this right here, which I believe might go to the power reverse. But anyways, yeah, it's a little bit more sparse on this side, and the molded on detail definitely does show. It's definitely more obvious when there's less piping going around. But yeah, still pretty cool. Alright, let's take a quick look at the tenders. These tenders are both the 15,000 gallon variant. Santa Fe also had the 12,000 gallon variant, which just looks like a shorter one of these, which were actually very common on the Santa Fe 4000 class Mikados. A lot of them had the 12,000 gallon tender. The 15,000 ones I don't believe were actually super common, which is kind of strange. However, BLI did choose all road numbers that did have a 15,000 gallon tender at some point or another. BLI did that because they didn't want to make a new tender. You know, they had already a good tooling for a good tender from the 210-2s, and they basically just reused it for the 282. They didn't want to make a new one. Another reason why I don't think this engine is quite worth the price, but I'm not going to make a big deal out of it because it is still a really nice tender. So yeah, let's take a quick look at this. On the front of these two tenders, which by the way, these are identical, so anything I talk about this tender is the same for this. So yeah, in the front here, there's some nice metal separately applied grab irons, as well as some details in the front here. There's a little thing up here which looks like a tissue box. I'm not really sure what that's for, as well as two toolboxes. I assume this is either for, well, spare tools, or it's maybe for each engineer and fireman to put their stuff in. I'm not really sure. On the sides we have Santa Fe and 4023 printed on the sides here. It is painted in a really subtly metallic silvery white, so it is actually really nicely done. Some of the microscale decals are a bit too silver, other ones are a bit too white. This is done rather well. And also, you'll notice that it has Santa Fe and the number. So if you guys didn't know, Santa Fe painted their tenders with the big Santa Fe after 1942. So anything before then, they shouldn't have the Santa Fe on it, just the number. And then anything afterwards had the number too. That's just some interesting thing to know about. But otherwise, the paint is done really well. The rivets are well done. Yeah, so nothing much else to talk about. Up top we have the oil bunker here. There's some nice, actually really flexible handrails, and obviously they're flexible because you know, otherwise if it was brittle it could just easily break off. And yeah, I think they're really well done. I think Broadway Limited chose it was a good idea to make these flexible instead of brittle. Whereas some YouTubers don't like a flexible plastic because they call it cheap. I think this is a really good choice, and I think it's well done. You can also see some latches or hatches for where you can put the oil in, and also I assume this is an oil dipstick for it, but yeah, pretty well done. Alright, here's the rear of the tender. Again, so this is another variation between the Road and the Switcher pilots, and there's two folds, so there's two things. So first off, there's a Switcher pilot deck here where people can stand on. Very dangerous, but technically people could have stood in on here before, whereas the Road Pilot one does not have it. The second thing is the Switcher Pilot does have a rear light, whereas the Road Pilot doesn't. So those are just things to note. Otherwise though, very similar details. It has really nice crisp lettering on here. There's actually a few additional keep off symbols on the Paragon 4 version instead of the Paragon 2, but everything else is more or less the same. One key note though between the Paragon 2 and Paragon 4 version is that this rear red light here actually lights up. The Paragon 2 one is just a dummy. It's a brass piece, which looks really good, but this one actually operates, and it is actually at the correct size. This one's a bit too oversized, and also the fact that it doesn't operate, which I think I mentioned already. But yeah, this one, it does operate. However, I think it's on 24/7. I don't think there's a way to turn it off. I'll have to double check that, and I'll let you know later in the video, but to my knowledge, I don't think you can turn that thing off, which is a bit unfortunate because for the most part it should be off actually. But yeah. Here's just a better look at the top of the tender. As you can see, here's the light here. It's done really well. BLI did a really good job concealing the wires, which is actually just goes down in between. There's just a little straight wire that's going straight down. But otherwise, it's a really well done headlight. Everything else is also really well, really nicely casted. Here's a nice little toolbox, as well as some other details, as well as a little step here, which is really cute. And there's two water hatches, which is really cool. So yeah, well done. Alright, I think it's time for us to get her started up with the sound. I have the track powered up now, and we'll get to hear how she sounds. So function 9 starts her up. Let's turn on the headlight. There we go. You can also see the cab light turned on. Let's hear the bell. I really do like this bell. It actually sounds really good. Let's hear the whistle. You can see the smoke unit starting up. I'm going to turn that thing off because I don't like smoke. I'm going to turn that bell off. There we go. I blew the whistle. Ignore that. I turned the smoke off. Hopefully that stops smoking. Anyways. Sounds, yeah, I don't know. Like, Broadway Limited claim this is a Paragon 4, which is supposed to be very different from Paragon 3, but they sound very similar. The startup sequence sounds nearly identical with the people walking on the ballast, going in, starting up. It sounds very similar. It has the same, like, uncrisp sound quality that is kind of infamous for BLI decoders. That's my main thing I don't like about Broadway Limited decoders. The sound files themselves sound really good, but the quality of the sound just sounds terrible. And I don't think it's speakers or anything like that. I don't think it's a speaker or the lack of enclosure or anything like that. I just simply think the kind of decoder they're using is just not great. In fact, for comparison, I actually have my other Santa Fe locomotive here. This one has TCS wow sound. I'm gonna mute this one real quick. Function 8. Cool. I do like how it gradually goes off. Anyways, here is the one with TCS wow sound. See, this engine just has that much more crisp of sound, and I appreciate that, you know? Like, if I hear this thing running. Anyways, this is not a review of the TCS wow sound. I'm going to turn that off. But anyways, let's get back to this engine here. Yeah, so my point being with this decoder is that it derailed right there. My point being is this decoder doesn't sound much different than Paragon 3. You can see the headlight or the cab light only turns on when the engine is stationary. Here we're gonna take a look at the rear. So the rear light obviously works. Let's go actually take it in reverse. It's actually really bright. The LED is a nice warm yellowish glow, not orange like Bachmann, but also not very blue. It's a really nice color. I do appreciate that. The rear light here actually can be turned off. It is actually function 24, which is really nice. There it is off. There it is on. I'm gonna probably be keeping it off for most of the time because again, those were never really on unless if the engine was stationary at a siding or something like that. Anyways, so the light package on this engine is fantastic. We're going to quickly go through the whistles on this engine. As you guys know, Broadway Limited decoders from Paragon 2 and up have always 4 whistles. There's the 3 whistles you can program with function CVE 224, and there's a 4th whistle, the auxiliary whistle, which I think you can activate with function 22. So here's the default whistle. Here is the whistle, the auxiliary whistle, function 22. Here is the whistle with CV224 programmed to number 1. And here is the whistle with CV224 programmed to number 2. Honestly, they all sound rather similar. There's no really huge differences between them. I'm going to choose probably just the default whistle. I'll go back to it and I'll stick with that one for now, for this review. Alright, let's see how her slow speed is. I'm going to set her to the 128 speed steps, like there. And now we're going to see what speed step 1 is like by default. I'll be honest, I've seen better speed step 1s. That is rather fast. Now I'm sure that's probably just a decoder thing. I'm sure you could program it to go slower, but I mean it's very smooth and quiet, I'll tell you that. This is without running in, by the way. So yeah, rather impressed. It's very smooth and slow. I know BLI is famous for using, I think, 1:28 gear ratios for their gearboxes. I'm not 100% sure on that, don't quote me on that, but this is rather fast. I think it's probably just decoder programming that's making it go so fast. I could definitely change some parameters and probably make it go slower, but well, there you go. That's default. Alright, before I couple her to a train, there's a few other things I want to address. This thing weighs 1 pound 4 ounces, which gives it a pretty solid weight. It means that it could have a pretty solid drawbar pull. However, this thing does have traction tires, which means that basically drawbar pull is infinity, because you can give this engine literally any length of train and they'll be able to pull it, or the motor burns out, which is always fun. But anyways, yeah. As far as couplers go, they're both KD couplers. The rear one is at the perfect height. The front one is a bit low, as you can see. It is kind of mounted poorly in the front there, as we saw earlier, and the coupler height kind of proves it. And one more thing I want to show you guys is the keep alive system. So this thing does have super capacitors inside, which allow it to navigate dirty track. So we're going to set this throttle to speed step 5 at 128. I'm going to lift the engine up and see how long it can still run for. So that was about 3 seconds of motion, and then about another 3 seconds until the sound and lights cut off entirely. I'm going to mute this real quick. So that should be obviously more than enough to get this engine through any sort of dead zone. And yeah, pretty efficient. Alright, I got a train coupled to her, and I also turned on the smoke unit just for the hell of it for this very first run. Afterwards I'm going to turn it completely off because I don't really like smoke, but just to see how it looks, we'll have it on for this first run. Let's see it roll out. Alright, so for some concluding thoughts. What I think of this engine? I think this engine is great. I think it's awesome. I think BLI hit a home run with this engine. There's no major downsides to it. I don't see any problems with it. I don't really see what they could have done better except for price. This engine, it has the same amount of detail as the Paragon 2 engine, basically. It has a similar mechanism. It has the same exact tender. It has a different DC sound decoder. And it costs $100 more. The Paragon 2 version retails for $299, or used to retail for $299. It had an MSRP of $399. This engine originally was going to be released in Paragon 3, and it had a same MSRP of $399. But then for some reason BLI was like, hey, let's put this in, make this the first or second Paragon 4 engine, and added the $100 to the MSRP. Now, that is where that's the caveat with this engine that I don't really agree with. That's the one thing I can't recommend about it. It's too expensive. For $499 MSRP or more, realistically, you're paying $399, $400 for most retailers. That's how much they sell it for. It's a bit too expensive for me, I think. I don't think the fact that BLI charges $100 extra, not for a decoder, but for a different decoder. Keep in mind, you're not going from DCC ready to DCC sound. Like, that would make sense if you jumped $100, but you're going from Paragon 3 DCC sound to Paragon 4 DCC sound. So you're not getting a decoder, you're just getting a different decoder, and you're being charged $100 extra for that, which I think is a bit ridiculous. So for comparison, this is now, because of the $100 tax, this now costs more than brass engines, or a similar brass engine with DC sound. You can get a Sunset 282 for around $250. I've seen them sell for lower. I've seen one sell for $180, which is insane, but you can get them for at most around $250, and then you could buy like an $80 DC sound decoder, install it yourself, paint it, whatever. And you can save money through that way. You could save money buying brass. That shows how expensive this engine is, because usually it shouldn't. I mean, this is okay. Granted, it is a bit more detailed than brass, but brass has its value too, and the fact that this is more expensive than brass is a bit, it's a bit crazy. I mean, that's like borderline MTH. I hate to say it, but anyways, So the value just really isn't there. When it's cheaper to get a brass engine, that's when you know you're a bit overpriced. So I don't think it's really worth the money there. I don't think the engine itself is really worth strictly speaking, the value. It's not there. That being said, though, if you're a Santa Fe modeler and you like RTR and you don't feel like working with brass engines, this is a great model. It's a fantastic model. There's nothing to complain about except for the price, and I'd highly recommend it. So that's my thoughts on the engine. If you guys have any other comments or questions, please let me know down below. And that's pretty much it. Lovely engine, well done BLI, and yeah, so anyways, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.